Chapter is listed as hidden basics. So in here we're going to start looking at what are the tools that we have available to us, what are we going to use them for, starting to think about tool usage, maybe using them exactly the way that you have in the past, and others kind of thinking about different ways or uncommon ways to go through and use them. So the big thing we get in here and start working with our tools is to start to think about what are our tools. What's your toolbox look like? And really identify those tools that you use. If you look at what Brett lists inside of here, we're all going to have our own tools, the go-to tools, the go-to methods even. If you watch me work on certain things, you're going to be like, wow, he does that much different than I do. He's doing that the long way. And a lot of it has to do with how do we start using the application, and then what are the tools that we've used. And there are tools that I go in and that I work with that are probably the long way to work with some stuff. But for me, it ends up being more efficient than trying to go through and use tools that you don't know. So start to think about what is it that you're using, where you use them. So for his workflow, the majority he has in here is his move tool. Then he talks about the selection tool. So those are his marquees, his lassos, quick selection. The brush, he uses the bucket, the eyedropper, the healing tools. So we start talking about healing, spot healing, and also content aware move. It allows us to go in and, of course, pull things out, change things very quickly. Content aware, I still say, is probably one of the best things they got incorporated into Photoshop, because it definitely sped up instead of having to use the clone stamp over and over again. But he still, of course, does use the clone stamp, because as we go through and we start to work with those other tools, they're not perfect. We'll have little things that don't show up, but then we also have little blemishes that are much easier to kind of go in and take care of, clone stamp them in, or even create duplicates as we go through to work with it. So when we start looking at the tools, what you're going to find is don't sit there and say, wow, somebody only has 5 tools they use. It doesn't matter really what you use. If somebody's trying to use 20 tools, the question really comes down to, are they efficient with those 20 tools? So start to document, start to track what it is that you use, and then focus on getting good with those individual tools. The more advanced you are with them, the more you repeat that workflow, the better you're going to be with them. Now, one thing, we start getting into the move tools, a lot of times we go to use the move tool, people don't think about just how much power do we have with the move tool. Now, if I were to come in here and grab a hold of this, yes, I can click on this and I can do exactly what it says. I can move this. But the other thing that's available to us that many people aren't aware of is the ability up here to show transform controls. So if you think about, if you've worked in Illustrator and the ability to go in and grab a hold of those handles and move things around, we can do that inside of Photoshop with it. So we have these handles. So you can see here, I can grab a corner, I can go in, I can start to scale this. I can scale it up. We can come in here and we can move around what is here. So we have that capability. If we come in here and we grab a side, it's going to scale it from each area. So how is it we want to go in and begin to work with them? These handles, the functionality of it, are nice because we can go through, we can place it. So instead of having to go in and deal with typing in a scale and having it go from a certain point, this allows us to go ahead and we can place something, and of course, so we can grab that handle, we can scale it down without having to switch tools. So we don't have to go in and choose a scale tool to go in and make this change. A lot of people aren't aware that we can go in and do these transformations inside of Photoshop, because by default, those transform handles do not get turned on. So if we go in and we're just working with that on the move tool and we're not turning those on, we don't have that available to us. So what else is that we can work with? If we go up here and we get off to the edge of it, you're going to see that we get the rotate. So I can go and I can rotate this too. If I come up here and do a handle, I hope I hit the right button. So we can come up here and we can decide, what do we want to do? Do we want to go to perspective? So now we go ahead and we start to do this, we can go ahead and we can adjust our perspective. If we hold down control, we come in here and we decide that we want to distort. The big thing with that move tool is there's a lot more power in it than just move. So think about how is it we're going to go use these. I come in here to warp. Now, if I stop this and were to commit to this, and I come in here and I show this, and I say, well, how many tools do you think that I used to create this? How many people are going to say one? Nobody's going to. Honestly, if you would have asked me at the beginning, can I get this far with it? No, you went in and you used a bunch of different things. But we didn't. We used one tool. But it allows us to control so much with that, especially as we go in and we start to play with placing things. We start to dealing with perspective. Because the big thing as we go in and we start to work with creating those composites, so we have to decide how large things are going to end up being. So we can easily do some real crude selections, start to place them in there, adjust this, move the things around, all simply using the move tool to get that basic composition prepared for us. So how is it that we can go about working with these tools? So as you start to think about the move tool, don't discount the ability to go in and work with that. The other thing, start thinking about the shortcut keys. We went and we worked in Illustrator. This is what's been nice with the Adobe products is they're bringing functionality that works really well in one area, bring it into another spot. So with that move tool, now I just went ahead and created this. So now what do I have? What did it make? Made a copy of it. So not only did I make a copy of it, it made a new layer of it. So I didn't just simply take that and copy it to the sense that now it's sitting here in its own, it's on the same as the other one. So now I have it overlapping the area. No, it created a whole new image, whole new layer, all at the same time. So the move tool has gotten really powerful as we start to bring it over into here. So start to think about how we can use that as opposed to in the past, if I were to say you need to take that and you need to give me a second layer with that image copied onto it, what would you have gone through? What steps would you have went through? Again, there isn't a right way and there isn't a wrong way. There's just the way that if I said, I need you to take that and create what you see up there right now, what steps would you have gone through and done without using the move tool? Okay, copied the layer and then moved it. Yeah, you could duplicate the layer, so you have that option too. You could just do layer duplicate. So there's a couple ways you could do it like that, but where does that take your focus then from when you go through and create that? Onto a different tool, and it takes you away from what you're actively working on at the moment, because we're going to be leaving it. If I had gotten rid of everything else on the screen, and the only thing I'm looking at is my window here with my document in it, the document window alone, without ever leaving this, I am able to go ahead and make a duplicate of it. So as we start to look at that, as you start to think about that, these are areas where we're going in there. We want to begin to work smarter, not harder. Begin to work efficient. That's not to say that you wouldn't go back and possibly do the old way because you forget about it. And that's why when we start talking about pushing that workflow and the tools and stuff like that, kind of get used to the fact of using the tools over and over and over again so you become more proficient with it. So we can do everything that we can do with all the transform stuff we can do right inside of here, because we can get into this setup here. Well, it's not isolate layers. So we can go in and we can make those changes. Now I'm trying to see why it's not giving me my transform stuff again. But allows us to make those transformations, those adjustments to it using, again, a single tool inside of here. Now we go through and we start looking at the ways to make our selections. As I talked about, there's how many ways or how many shapes that we ultimately make selections with? 2. So when we go through, we start to think about what is it that we have available to us. I'm going to go ahead and open up from the lesson 2 resources. So in here, chapter 2, let's go ahead and I'm going to open up this lake image. So we go through, and in this case, we have this image of this lake. And we start to think about ways that we can select. So when we talk about a shortcut key for the rectangular marquee selection is what? M, yes. So shortcut takes us to M. So it allows us to go in. Remember, we have them up here inside of our toolbar, just below our move tool. There are our selections. So there's our rectangular marquee and our elliptical marquee. Those are the 2 shapes that we work with. Yes, can they be squares? Can they be circles? Yes, but it's still rectangle, still an ellipse. So those are available to us. Now as we go through, we start to work with it. Like I said, we have the rectangular marquee. If you hold down your shift key, remember that allows you to toggle through them, because as you saw when I pulled up the menu, we have marquee as M and the elliptical marquee is also M. So holding down that shift will allow you to jump over to the elliptical marquee. So we can go ahead and we can draw that ellipse inside of here. Now as we go through and begin to work with stuff, the selections you make, how you work with them, is going to be entirely up to you. Can we work with the ellipse and the rectangular marquee for a lot of stuff? Yes. The other thing we have available to us then are our different lassos. So as we start to work with them, as we start to make these edits, you will start to see that the closer you work with an object sometimes isn't always better. Now, if we're going in to make a copy of something, yes, we're going to try to get right onto those pixels, but if we're trying to replace something, sometimes it works a little bit better to give a little bit of space around it. Otherwise, it wants to blend those pixels together. So if we go and we look at what we have on here, let's go ahead and look at our lasso tool. So once we have a selection, how do we go about getting rid of a selection? Deselecting everything. Command D. Command D is our deselect. So if we have something selected and we want to get rid of that, Command D is going to do that. Just again, getting used to what is there. Now we start to look at what we have inside of the water here. We want to get rid of some of these rocks, because what we're going to be looking for in the final product is going to be this nice serene lake going across there. So how do we want to go about getting rid of these? What tool do you want to use? Let's have some fun here. You can use the, yes, but we're going to select them first. So we can use a marquee tool. We could certainly come in here possibly with an ellipse, and a lot of it's playing around and see what works. So we go in and we have this selected. So now we can go about filling this. How do we want to go about filling it? Well, if we go ahead and we right click, again, this is going to keep us in the moment. So if you're one of those people who tends to want to go to the menu to select all your stuff, try to think about what's there. Think about that secondary menu, that right click that's going to pop up. Are the features or what it is that you're trying to do they exist in there? If they do, the best part about it is we can keep our focus right in the middle of our composition. So we never have to take our eye off of it. We can just keep focusing, working, moving, and continuing to move forward. So in this case, we do that, and we have this ability to go through and fill. We have our stroke, and we have our content aware fill. So if I click on content aware fill, what's going to happen with this? So it's going to look at what's around there. So we're going to go in and see what do we get as the finished product. So what's nice about this is it's showing us here what our finished product is going to look like. And this is something that's been added in this preview, as opposed to us creating the effect That is nice. So we see the preview in there. If you're happy with that, we just simply go ahead and if we click on OK, notice it goes in there. It's going to replace that. Now, there will be times you're going to see as you start to work with it that it doesn't end up quite that clean. It's getting better and better and better. When Content Aware first came in, the downfall with it was almost part of the algorithm had a blur to it. So when you got in close, you could see that something was replaced there because the pixels were blurred in there. If we look at it now and I deselect it, it's really hard to tell that we actually went in and replaced something in there. So that's one method we could do it with the selection like that. You could use the other selection tools. So the polygonal lasso, the regular lasso, depending on what you're selecting. Could you go through and use the quick select? Yes. So with that, you can use whatever you want to use to go in and make these selections. So when we go through and start to work with it, we do have to kind of be careful though as we're working because we will start to potentially work with something that becomes destructive. Now what happens when we did our fill this way, you're going to see here, is that it's creating this based on a layer standpoint. So as we go through and start to work with it, since I went in and built it that way, we get this background copy that shows up. If I go ahead and make that same selection, should be if I come in here and take this and we just do a fill and we choose Content Aware. Now what's going to happen with this one, if we say OK, is we get the same result. But if we pay attention to our layers panel over here, notice that it's disappeared from here. So depending on what it is that you're doing and whether or not you want to be able to bring that back, that's where it's going to be the difference between whether you just simply go ahead and choose fill or you do Content Aware fill. That Content Aware fill is creating a new layer to us. The other way won't. Most of the time, why are we removing content from our image? Because we don't want it. So while, yes, I refer to it, and they will refer to it too as doing a fill that's just Content Aware like that, is a destructive method. Odds are 99 times out of 100, if not greater than that, we are removing that content because it's not going to be in there. We don't want it in there. It's distracting. So with that, you may decide you don't want this other one here. Now, can you see the difference in them? Yes. If I go ahead and zoom in on the area, you're going to see as we toggle that on and off, is there a slight difference in it? Yes. Part of that is based upon where I selected, and the other part of it is just because the algorithm that goes through and runs it is going to be there. Are you going to notice it at a full zoom like this, or at this point 130.23%? No. So with that, we're going to use whichever of the selection tools you ultimately want to go through and use to get those out of there. Now, as you select them, I said you have the option of using a lasso. We can also use the magnetic lasso or polygonal lasso. So on these larger ones, if we come in here, we can go around them. And what's nice, like I said, is as the newer versions come out, it's always neat to watch how much better the tools get on isolating pixels and that. But if we go ahead and we have that set there and we do the same thing, we do a fill, Content Aware, and say OK, you can now see it went in and adjust it. This is when I talk about being careful with what tool you use and how close you end up getting it to the edge. Because what's going to happen is there are a couple pixels left on there. It's going to go through and end up with something that looks like this. So that's one of those situations as you go through and you begin to build them, start to think about how you want to select these. In this case, you can come in here with a regular lasso, get in here closer, give yourself a little bit of room. Whoop, that might be too close. And there we have our solution to it. So you can use, and I want you to work, and that's what today is going to be with this, is going through and making those selections. Do we have a magic wand? Yes, we can also go through and use our magic wand These are all up here underneath the selection. So we have object selection, quick selection, and magic wand. Again, they're all W's, so Shift W is going to allow you to toggle through them. But could you come through and select certain areas and possibly get that to work? Yes, you can. When there's not a lot of variance in color, that can work. The other thing, don't forget that as we go through and we start making additional selections, what else can we do to our selections? Remember, we can go ahead and come in here, we can select modify, and we can also expand it. So we could come in here and make this expand by 20 pixels. So if you do make a selection and you're worried about those halos, or you got a really tight selection to it, you can expand that out by a few pixels to help make sure that you don't have those in there. Now I can see on this, if I run this one, I may get a little bit of that other large rock to come into play here. So as we go through and we start to get those, what are we going to end up doing with these? So we can see it didn't actually pick it up. So we're able to go in and start to isolate out this. So what today again is about inside of here, or what we're working on that'll be due by class next week, is going in and isolating this out. Clean this entire lake up, get those rocks out of there so we're able to go in and work with them and edit those out of there. Let's go in, and the second file that is inside of there is this sword draw. Let's go ahead and open this one up. So this is a situation where we have an individual, in this case, her drawing the sword, that we want to go ahead and be able to pull her out so that she appears as though she's looking out the lake as she's drawing the sword, getting ready to take on the dragon that's about to come out of the water that you just made nice and smooth and nice and clear, and she's going to slay it. Maybe. So as we go through and we grab a hold of this, the other thing that we have is the ability to go ahead and to select and mask. We use this briefly inside of 184. We thought about the magazine cover, going in and making a selection. Now with that, we can decide what we have for our transparency. So how transparent is the image that we have on there? As we go through to make our selection. Now, would I come in here and I start working inside of here to make my selection? No, because what we want to do is we want to go ahead and make a selection first on the outside edge. So if I come out here, whatever tool you want to choose, it could be the magic wand. We could actually do select color range. And we can click on, in this case, the background color. You'll see it does a pretty good job letting me know what's going to be selected. And we can say, okay. So right now, what do we have selected? So we go through and we have our background available to us. So if I come in here and I say on black. So what areas are we actually seeing? So we go through and we start to look at our selection on here. So as we go through and we begin to build what's here, we're going to have to go in and start to make our edits to this and selecting and, if I come in here and I do this, what's happening? So we see that we're getting parts that are disappearing. So what's happening as I come in here and I start to do this? So as we start to think about what is it that we're doing with our selection, how are we going about selecting this individual content that is in here? This is an opportunity to go in and really deal with the selections and be able to isolate out what we're seeing, what we're not seeing, what's part of the overlay. So we come in here, if we add some of this to it, we can come in and we can start to adjust these pieces. So as we go through to make our selections, what are we adjusting with this? So refine the edge. So now we're going to come in here and really start to look at what do we have for our edges. And you can see it starts to pull off that edge there. So if I come into this and I want to remove things from it. Now, if I'd use this, it's refining just the edge portion. If I come back up here for my selection, this will allow me to come in here and really target in what do I want to get rid of. Oops. So this is doing the large stuff, trying to get rid of the major pieces. And then if we go ahead and we refine that edge, it's going to allow us to come back in here then. As I come over top of it, you'll see it starts to pull out based upon the color in that. So when we start to get through the hair, same type of thing is going to start to happen as we grab a hold of the hair. So as we make these selections, what are we going to use to make that selection? Now, some like to work, in this case, I'd be working with the mask around her. You could also go back in if we cancel that out. You see it's going to have my selection. The other thing you can do too is we go ahead and we can select, actually let's select based on color range once again because I have a solid background. So if you're working on shooting images, so we start thinking about the people, or we start to think about objects that are in the air or other objects are showing up. If you're taking pictures of them, neutral backgrounds will allow you to go through and quickly extract what's there. So in this case, I went off color range. Once again, I say okay. So we know we have that background selected. If I went ahead and inverted this selection, now we know that we have her selected. So now if we went back in here and we say selected mask, we can start to see that background that's there. And we can come in here and begin to isolate out these areas of the selection. So I'm just clicking in the larger areas right now. And then if we come back in to refine that edge, now based upon our brush size and that, we can go ahead and come through here and it's going to start to identify those areas. If we have hair that we're losing, we can come through here and we can look at it that way. If I go ahead and adjust what we're viewing it on, we can see, so as we come through and we start to make these selections, we can start to isolate out that hair. As I've mentioned, these tools continue to get better and better and better. So even based on the previous selections, don't just trust it, because what we have is we have that halo. So you've heard me talk about that a lot. You end up with a halo. Well, if we come in here with this and we work to refine this edge, it's going to come in there, it's going to work that arm. So what we had in the background is now gone. So it's going to get rid of the majority of what is there. So making sure you run those edges so it cleans them up. On some of the areas you may find that you actually have to go back in and do a little different selection on them. This tool continues to add flexibility. So when you start to think about what is it that you're working with, look over in the dialog then. And after we make our selections, what else can we go in and do? So majority of that looks pretty good. There's some spots with the hand. But if we come over here and we start to look at what's available to us on this, as we go through and we create it, it's looking at the edge detection. So it's going to go through and change what the actual refinement area is. We want to smooth something out, so we start looking at our selection, smoothing out that, feathering it. So you see as we expand that feather, we get that little like glow going around it. These are all creative things you can also do, so don't be afraid to go in and create something. You can set a feather, go ahead and play it out and see what you get for the output at the end, the contrast. So it's going to look at what we have between the image itself, shift edge. So do we need to expand out the shifting for selections, or even come in? When you come in, you're going to see it starts to cut part of her off. So you're going to want to play with these a little bit and adjust them and see what you get that works. And so if we're happy with it, and we say, okay, so now it goes in and makes this selection. So now we can go ahead and we can take this if we want to, and we can go ahead and we can duplicate that layer. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and send it to my document called Lake. And I'm going to call it prefer. Say OK. So now what do we have over here? Well, now, why didn't it commit it? I love it when things work like they're supposed to. It's because it's just a selection over here. So let me take this. Let me try it this way. I'm going to try something a little different. So in this case, I just went ahead and I just did a quick copy of her and moved her over onto here. Now, as you bring things across here, this will give you a chance to kind of look at what's on there. And we start to look at, what's happened with our selections. How are they going on to what is there? Now, as we start to work with these, you're going to find that there's other ways that you can also go ahead and deal with the masking and refining the edge as you go through to output them. The other thing, as we look at this individual layer too, if we're in here on the refine the mask, we can output. I didn't go down to that. We have the capability for output settings. So what's going to happen? Can we decontaminate colors? Yes. Where do we want to output to? So in this case, it would allow us to go ahead and create ourselves a new layer, a new document. If I do just new layer, it should export that out onto its layer. So there's the original. There's the one that's masked out based upon the selections. Now what you're going to see on here is, again, I didn't really focus in on making the selections perfect and go in and fix a bunch of stuff. So we're going to see what's here. So think about how you make your selections, how you refine those selections, how you bring them in, where you're working with those at, and bringing it into this area. But we're going to find that as you start working, there are a lot of capabilities that we can go through and that we can use and allow things to work. As we go through to use the clone stamp, some of you may or may not have used that in the past. Remember, as we go through and start to work with our stamp, that we have to define an area. So that option click. So if I wanted to get part of these trees out of here and I wanted to be able to bring it down close to there, I'd have to actually define an area. And then I can come in here and I can already tell based upon where I'm at that I'm not on the right layer, which happens. So we can come in here and we can start to paint away stuff. So we have things on the edge, because this is a situation where the content aware probably is not going to function for it or work well for it because of the standpoint of the content that is close to there. So that's where you're going to find that it kind of floats its way up. So we can come in here and work to paint these objects away. So again, get used to using tools like this. It's taking a sample off of here. So the nice thing about it is we have the sky that's there. So now if we come back out, we can see what is working, what isn't working. We go through the healing brushes. Again, these are all spot healings. This allows us to go in and get rid of certain things. So we look at, in this case, we come down, we have stuff that's inside of the water. Instead of using the other, we can actually go ahead and just spot heal. It's kind of designed for working with specs and that are on those. So we have these that we can come in and use. Now in smaller things, they tend to work really well. The large areas is where sometimes you'll see a difference in what comes out based upon just the areas that you've gone in and painted. But it continues to get better. But you can see what happens with the large stuff. Can we get rid of it? Yes, I can still continue to work in here to get rid of it. But usually if you can fit it right inside the brush with a click, this will allow us to quickly get rid of items inside of here. So you can see we're slowly cleaning up what is there. Now, as we go through and we start to work with the things, understanding what exactly are we pulling the items from. So as we go through to start to make selections, pay attention to your options bar across the top. So in this case, what are we doing? Content aware, create texture, proximity matches, sample all layers. So if you go through and you're building something up and you're going to leave something in its place, like we have these layers set up right now, if you actually sample all layers, it's going to pull from every single layer that's there, kind of looking at it as though it's essentially a composite that is available to it. What are we trying to do with things? So as we go through and we start looking at content aware especially, what is it that you want to do? So up here on the top, as we start to look at content aware, sample all layers, transform on drop, we have structure, we have color, and then what are we trying to do? Move or extend. So if I come in here, for example, and I have that set to move, and I've gotten rid of most of my good rocks, but if I come in here and grab a hold of this one, and right now I have it on move, if I bring it over there and drop it, notice it creates a copy of it. That's essentially what we're doing. We're moving that and putting another one in a location. If we have that selected and we change this over to extend, and I bring this down like this and drop it, well, there it goes. So move is going to go in, pick it up and move it. Extend means repeat. So that would be that's my mistake on that. So we go ahead and we've moved that down to there as opposed to extend, which that's going to create my duplicate if I drop it here. There we go. So as you go through to work with it, what is it that you want to build? Keep in mind where you're dropping stuff. How is it going to look? You saw when I dropped it in the middle of the water, what happened to it? It just takes that selection and works with it. So you do have to be aware of how you're moving it. Once you move that into there, you're probably going to then want to go in and clone stamp to soften up areas to help make them begin to match. As we start working with textures, brushes. So don't be afraid to come in here and start to look at what can we do with our brushes, what's available to us, how can we go in and work with everything that's available. So we have dry media brushes. What is the look that we're going to get with them? Start thinking about brush dynamics. So grabbing a brush, creating some sort of scatter brush, allowing us to go in and make those changes, make those adjustments to it. Going in and getting different brushes, looking at brushes, other brushes that are available. So think, what can we do with our brushes? So when we start talking about brush settings, we talked briefly about these, but what do we have available to us? So if we come down and we start to look at what's in here, scatter brush. So what happens when we come in and we start to work with these brushes that are designed for that? We start looking at textures. What can we do with these? If we look at spacing. So what exactly are we coming in here to put? How are we using it? Let's see. Let's have some fun here. So if I have my brush, it's set, and I come in here and I start to click, we can see what we're getting with that. Remember, as we go through, if we start to use this and we come in here from a layer mask standpoint, decide, hey, we want to go ahead and have a layer mask on here. Well, what happens when I come in and I start to use this? So now we're going to start cutting away from things. If I go to her and add a layer mask to it, what happens when we start to do this? So we start to get that texture. It's allowing us to see through things, degrade things. If we go through and we start working with a ginormous size to this, what's going to happen to it? Then we go ahead and we click in there. Too often we start thinking about brushes or using brushes, we're thinking about brushes from just strictly a painting purpose. But what does it allow us to do from an artistic purpose inside of what Photoshop allows us to do? So now we're able to control what's starting to happen with how things pop in there. And going in and starting to deal with that scattering, adjusting the size, adjusting the spaces. This allows us to go in and adjust those things and make them do what we want them to do. Depending on brushes as well, we can come in here and continue to expand other things. So we get into the texture side of it, that jitter. You know, how much do they change? You know, as we look at scaling, we can make these be a different scale. I mean, all of this stuff that we're able to go in there and set up allows us to start to change what exactly are we doing? How is this going to come out? So as I come in here and start to put it, it's not the same thing over and over again. So we can start to adjust the brush. So as we continue to do it, how many of them, you know, how much does it change? the count. So how many are in there? So now if I come out here, for example, and I start to go, you can see they're going to start to pop around there. So we get that effect that's coming in there to where it's not a consistent look to it. So we can deal with rotation. So as you start to look at how we can use those brushes, what can that brush allow us to do? Think about that paint splatter. If you've seen people that do the painting with spray paint, and you see them get it on and they flick the paint on it. That's really what we're going to start creating as we start to use those brushes. But textures. It's a great way to go in and build the textures, use the textures. Remember, we can also create textures inside of Photoshop by taking those textures that we found in the other areas, tree bark, sandpaper, rock breaks. How can we bring those items in and work with them as well? Don't forget about blend modes. If we shoot something on a white background, we can come in and we can adjust it very quickly with our blend mode to go ahead and make that background just disappear. So those are all things to be aware of as we go in and begin to work with it. So what I want you to do is I want you to take the lake image and the sword image, and both of those are inside of Brightspace. And I want you to go ahead and clean the lake up, get that stuff out of there, and go ahead and work on extracting her out, clean up the edges, and bring her into there. It can just be 2 simple layers on there of the her over top the lake. And this is really just designed to get you back into Photoshop, make you start to work with the stuff, play with the tools that are available, and figure out what is working for you and the way that you want them to all go. And then with that, inside of Brightspace, there will be a submission folder. I think it's already in there. If we go under this week, so weekly assignments, week 2, right there, Woman at Lake. Once you're done, just go ahead and upload your Photoshop document and then go ahead and create a JPEG, PNG. Really, the second image doesn't matter to me as long as it's just a regular image so that I can see it as it not being a Photoshop document. That is due, as it says, by January 26th at 11:59, so that'll be just before midnight of next week when we have class again. So that can be done today, that can be done over the weekend, whenever it is that you want to go through and do it.